So this is 30 Wonders, 30 Years, a history of the museum and 30 objects. And this is not an original idea of mine. There are other museums that have done similar things that, told the story of the museum or a collection by selecting certain objects. But it seemed really good for us for this year. And it's a nice kind of size for being 30. It's not exactly 30 objects because some years have more, but it's pretty much one object per year. And we get to bring out some really fun stories and pieces from the collection. And very fittingly, the first piece accessioned into the museum collection was this work by Carl Rungus from the Kerr collection. So that can talk about the founders, the founding collection, the interest in Rungus, etc. And you probably know this, but this number at the bottom of the tombstone info, which we call the tombstone info, it's just the basic information, is 1987.001. So 1987 is the year the work was accessioned, and 001 is the number, the order that it was accessioned in. So 1987 probably has 200 entries. And it's lucky for us that the registrar at the time started what was then an Excel spreadsheet with this piece. That is the first thing they wrote down as having entered the collection. There was just a question about the letters. And these are a little bit small, these labels, but we're going to put out some bigger print labels in a notebook over there. The letters before, there's M's, W's, JL's, P's, all kinds of different designations. L is for loan, so you'll often see an L. M is for museum purchase. W is for gift. And then, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And I don't know who decided that, but it's just the system we've got. And then JL is long-term loans from the Kerr collection, 99% of which will come into our collection. So you'll see a lot of JLs, but you'll also see a bunch of things that are JCAM collection and then have an M. Those are things that were on loan to us but then have been given, or at a certain point, to make it even more complicated, we would buy a third or something of what was here for $1, and then so technically we bought it, so it's an M. So anyway, it's a level of detail that is probably not that interesting to everybody, but it's part of how we keep track of things. It shows how it entered the collection, etc. Any questions about that?
Well, do we have a code sheet for it in case somebody asks? What does that mean?
We could. No one's ever asked. So, and more importantly is this number, 1987. Here it is, first thing that came into the collection. There is a nice little story with every single thing in here, obviously, and I'll try to quickly go through all of them. But again, you can read the story on the label, or I'll have this in a notebook, in a couple notebooks, which is easier to read. If you hear from people that this text really is too small, then we can order some new labels and get it enlarged. So there's a fun story, like 1988 is this cougar right here, Still Hunt by Edward Kemys, which is in a large version in Central Park. So there's a nice quote on that label from Bill Kerr that said when he and Jaffa would sometimes spend summers in New York City, they would take a jog through Central Park, and they would always make sure to stop by and see Kemys' Still Hunt. It was a highlight of their time there. And so when the smaller version of it became available, they pounced on it. And what's really cool too is this piece is made out of terracotta, so it's a clay kind of molded sculpture. And if you think about the other Kemys that's in the JKM gallery, it's an electroplate, so it's not a typical bronze. So you can see that Kemys was experimenting with different and maybe more economical ways to reproduce his artwork during this era when he was alive. There's also, all these nice connections to other galleries and other installations. 1989, is this collection of bison-related material to talk about the strong holdings of bison work that we have in the collection. That's always been an important part of what we have. And also, when Sue Simpson Gallagher was here, this was the first touring exhibit that the museum ever did, was a selection of our bison material that went to the Wyoming State Museum in Cheyenne. And we think maybe went to other places in the state. I'll have to ask her. But it definitely went to Cheyenne. So it's first touring exhibit put on by us, 1989. So 1990, this piece was accessioned. And this goes to show, this is by a famous American artist, Colin Campbell Cooper Jr. This goes to show the broadening of things, even at this early point, from what you would consider wildlife artists, who just do wildlife, into an interest in artists who did great versions of wildlife, or who did something that has an interesting story. So this piece reportedly was done when Cooper was on the, what is it called? Oh, the RMS Carpathia, when it got diverted to go help survivors of the Titanic disaster. So he was on that boat when it went over to help survivors of the Titanic, and apparently painted this while he was on that trip. So that's a really cool little fact. This is not his signature. It says 3 feet high, something something long. So this is his note about maybe how big this polar bear was. So that is a really cool, funny little factoid about that. 1991, the Clymer Studio collection came into the museum's purview. And this is not a work by Clymer, this is a work by Bob Kuhn. But the interesting story behind this is, long before there was a museum or a collection, Bob Kuhn traded this painting with John Clymer for an easel. That easel also ended up here through a totally different route and is now out in Johnston Hall. So this came from the Clymer Studio, and the Clymer easel came through Bob Kuhn, but there's that cool backstory that connects those two things. This painting was in the museum collection in 1992. When the Proctor family was here visiting, we showed it to them, and the grandson said, I think that's one of the pieces that was stolen from my aunt's house in 1985. So we promptly returned it to them. And then, that was probably 3 or 4 years ago. Then last year, when they gave the donation of artwork that you'll see a lot of those in JKM, the sculptures, they returned this to us, which was nice of them. So it was here, then it was gone, and now it's back. It's an interesting way that these things work.
Do they know who stole it?
No, I don't think they ever figured that out. But he just knows because it says to his, to his
Right.
aunt, blah blah
Right.
blah, and he was like, yeah, I think that was in my aunt's house when I was mistaken. So in that kind of thing, we're not going to say, well, we've got it right now. We're not giving it back to you.
Yeah.
Take it. Another. Really fun to have this back out.
Yeah.
People love this piece. And also a good way to extend, you can talk about the collection started with Rungus, then the Kerrs moved into Kuhn, but wanting to have a broad collection that represented what was going on in the world of wildlife art, they also started collecting pieces like this by Robert Bigman. 93, and then what we have throughout the galleries are these bar graphs that show how the collection grew in 5-year increments. So this is the number of artists, and this is the number of artworks, and it goes through time. So that's very little down there, and then it gets bigger and bigger as you go around. We oftentimes say we have a collection of about 5,000 cataloged objects. That includes artwork plus archival material plus all this other stuff. So when you get to the end over there, it doesn't say 5,000. It just says, 3,000 something. And that is a combination of sculptures, prints, sketches, and paintings, not including the other stuff. 1994, we moved to this building, and at the grand opening party, this piece by Rungus was presented to the Kerrs. This is the only dry point engraving that they didn't have in the collection of Rungus dry points. So they have a complete collection except for this one. This is the rarest one. Rungus made the fewest of these. And when we think, because it's a little bit of a funny foreshortening, and it wasn't as popular as other Rungus dry points, but for us, that means it was really hard to find. So this was a very special gift presented to the Kerrs and to the museum upon the opening of this building. This, as you know, used to be called the Showcase Gallery, and it was where changing exhibits were held. One of the earliest changing big exhibits we had was by John James Audubon, and this piece entered the collection right at about that time. I don't know exactly the story, but I assume that those two things are related, and regardless, you can say Audubon was one of the first, big exhibits that we had in this very space. So 95, 96, when we moved up to this building in 94, they of course changed the name from Wildlife of the American West to National Museum of Wildlife Art, which indicated a broader mission and a broader scope of collecting. So it could have also been called the International Museum of Wildlife Art because we really stopped limiting ourselves to North America or to the West, expanded into North America, expanded into the global scene. There are wildlife artists, especially from North America and Europe, who didn't just paint or sculpt where they lived. They went all over the world. So this is a great example of that by Bob Kuhn. These 4 sketches of Joseph the Lion, who came to visit us in the museum during the second big exhibit that we had, which was called Visions from the Veld. And there's a film of the lion in the museum.
I remember him walking all over this.
Yeah.
Walking through the galleries, do.
Yeah. And so this is a little film that's fun to show of him walking through the galleries. So he's walking into this room where you're standing. And he growls at this Kuhnert painting that's over there in JKM. We'll do it one more time. Because he does make a little growling sound when he gets up to the
I just have to ask, did he relieve himself?
No, he's trained lion.
But they turned him loose across the road in the elk refuge, and he didn't go more than 50 feet from his trailer.
Okay, watch. Susan has a nice little story on this label about the lion being here.
And where did the lion come from?
Hollywood.
It was gorgeous.
Yeah, he's a trained, movie actor. 96, this piece by Bart Walter goes along with what I was just saying, expanding the collection, broadening our horizons, not being limited geographically. There's the great story that he tells about his involvement with Jane Goodall is on there and how she commissioned him to sculpt a chimpanzee, and that led him on this path. This is not the chimp that he sculpted for her, but this came out of that development. And it's an early version of what I like to call slabular.
What did you call that?
Slabular. Slabular. I made it up. I want credit for it if that ever gets, into the common usage. I'm going to register that one and charismatic mini-fauna. So, this piece is a nice little piece that was collected in 1998, which was the first year that we had Collector's Circle. So, and I think this is the first piece that was accessioned from that event. So then you can talk about the history of Collector's Circle and what's happened over the last 19 years. Next year will be the 20th anniversary of Collector's Circle, and we'll have a special exhibit about that whole program and what we've been able to collect. 99 Picasso engravings came into the collection. There's 6 in here, and remember there's 7 more of them in the tiny exhibit. Again, just showing a major acquisition, but also how we're broadening people's definitions of what wildlife art is all about. And then this is kind of sad and poignant piece. The year 2000 is the year that Lanford Monroe died. She painted this in 1999, the year before she died, but it came into the collection in 2000. And it just, you can talk about how this museum's always had a really strong relationship with the living artists who are part of this wildlife art world, and how she was a very important part of that and died right at the peak of her powers. 2001 is over there. We got a little out of order as we started incorporating sculptures. 2001, the painting by Bruno Lillefors. When I got here in 2000, we had a good collection of Rungus, Kunert, Frieza. We didn't have any Lillefors, and Lillefors is the fourth member of that group that we call the Big Four, that are the most influential historic artists on wildlife artists working today. So we needed some Lillefors in the collection. I don't know how this happened, but it was good fortune. There was an auction house in Sweden called Bukowski's, and they started having some really good Lillefors paintings. The exchange rate was really good, so we were able to take advantage of that and build up a pretty great collection of Lillefors pretty fast. So, swans represent that. 2002, again, like broadening materials, broadening cultures. This is a sculpture by a native African artist from Zimbabwe, a young eagle. And it's also a nice stylized piece of artwork. You can then talk about stylization and contemporary modern art, etc. 2003 is that. Yeah, that painting over here. We also had to use our nice walls. So some of you might remember this, and I don't know if any of you got to see it when it first came in, but it was incredibly dirty, and it had all this kind of really gross brown crackled varnish all over it. But just being, when we could basically see this and this to know what the subject matter was, but beyond that you really couldn't tell what was going on. But there was enough there to say, like, this is probably worth taking a chance on, getting it restored, getting it cleaned, and then bringing it back. And so that really paid off in spades, because this did end up being a beautiful piece by Frieza. Helped build again that collection of historical European antecedents. And we figured out it was a whole family of moose, because there's this mother moose back here that I think we really didn't know was there at all. So she really came out once it was cleaned and conserved properly. So that's nice.
Yeah, I've got a question.
Uh-huh.
You know, the black walls are here because of Sartori,
Mm-hmm.
and in a perfect world, is that the color that you would want that piece exhibited?
That's pretty good. I would have picked a dark color for this exhibit.
Remember when we did Dusk to Dawn?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, no, these, especially these kinds of paintings, late 1800s, early 1900s, show up really well on dark walls. Actually, pretty much everything looks good
Yeah,
on these. Some other kind of notable acquisitions. Where are we? 2004. This great donation of pottery from the Wetzels. So this is one example of that. There are a bunch more in the JKM gallery in the big glass cases. There's many more examples of the pottery we were given. Just another way that you can talk about the collection broadening and expanding, incorporating different cultures, different styles, different media. And then you can go straight to Nieto here. This enormous painting come to life, as I like to call it. This is a wood sculpture by Nieto called Contemplating Mortality, which is both different for him and it's different, in terms of style from pieces that we had collected before. 2005, 2006, another new innovative piece. The first glass piece that we collected. I think we now have 4. And definitely Unless anybody can think of something that I'm forgetting, the only squid that we have. Because who chooses squid as a subject for your artistic endeavors? Continuing on here, you can see the collection steadily building over the years. So 2007, we have this great cat by Edward Kemys, which is similar, you might note, to this cat over there. So that was the model, or that's the version that is in Central Park called the Still Hunt. This is called the Deerstalker. It was planned or proposed to be a kind of complementary piece in Fairmont Park in Philadelphia. I'm pretty sure it's in Philadelphia.
It is.
They never commissioned this, the big version of this, to happen. So this could have been in there, but that didn't actually take place. But Kemys still did the design and everything for it. This is incredibly rare. This cast of this model, in part because probably it didn't, get blown up into a big version, which would have been a great sales tool, and people would want to buy the smaller one. This is the only cast of this that I've ever seen. So it could be unique. We're not quite sure, but it's definitely very rare, this piece. Whereas still hunts you see a little bit more often, in part because of the New York City Central Park connection. 2008, another example that's good to compare with the polar bear. Frank Benson, really well-known American artist, also did quite a few nice avian paintings, and this is just a great watercolor by him that we were fortunate to get in 2008. It was at Collector Circle, but it took Collector Circle plus a whole list of additional donors in order to make this happen, come into the collection. So Collector Circle, does everybody understand how that works?
Yes.
So at the end of the night in Collector Circle, there's often one or two pieces that haven't been purchased, and that's when people oftentimes stand up and say, I'll give $1,000 to that piece if this table gives $1,000, and then they kind of rally each other to add to the pot, and then we get more artwork, which is good for us. 2010, the premiere of Carl. I'll talk about 2009, wherever that is, over there. So 2010, Carl, so this great series of books about the museum, came to life. And then 2011, the initiation of the Bull Bransom Award for Children's Literature, or for illustration, children's illustration. So that was the first winner, Jerry Pinkney. And so that's been 6-7 years of the Bull Bransom Award. That's been really great. So we'll skip back to 2009 over here with the Richard Loeffler Buffalo Trail. Part of the impetus behind the sculpture trail was RSGBK Foundation talking to Rich Loeffler about enlarging this sculpture to the heroic size that it is right now. In those conversations and walking around the property, trying to figure out where this would go, where would it be best placed, etc., we realized that we needed a bigger sculpture program. We couldn't just start putting stuff down in all these random different places. So it's right at this point when these discussions start to happen that we then did a search for a landscape architect. We decided on Walter Hood, and the whole sculpture trail program developed out of this piece. Sculpture Trail opened in 2012, and this piece in large size was installed that summer along with Sandy Scott Eagle and the Moose and Simon Dutton Isis. So we had those kind of cornerstone pieces for the trail, and then we've added to it almost every year since. So it's been a really successful way to grow the collection and to grow the outdoor experience. This, I think you've all heard this story before, but it's one of the best ones, I think, collection-wise, that we have. Just what an interesting series of coincidences. We opened the museum with this poster the inaugural season, 1987. That image we lifted from this poster, which is an original poster from 1907, 1908, designed, painted by Carl Rungus. But we didn't know where the painting was, if there was a painting, etc. The painting was totally lost. In I think it was 2012 or 2011, somebody called me. I get these calls all the time. I found a Rungus in my attic. I found a Kuhn painting in my basement, etc. And the vast majority of time, that's just not what happened. So you have to say, no, that's probably a print, or no, Bob had a bunch of paintings reproduced on canvas for Seagram's, and so it's usually not an original painting that we really wanted to have. In this case, it was. So we got to go up to Canada, look at this painting, and then fly back with it in the plane. So it was really exciting. Really fun. The frame this was the original frame, so it was in this attic. And I like to say it's an attic because it makes you think of some dusty old place. It was probably pretty fancy attic. A pretty nice house. So it makes sense. But this was up there. It had been up there for a long time. It was really dirty. Again, like the Frieza. And there was a little hole, a little pinprick right up here. So sending it to the Western Center for Conservation of Fine Arts in Denver, they fixed the hole, they cleaned it, and it looks, amazing. It looks almost new. What's also really interesting about this is Rungus, was really careful with his brushwork, and I think that's something that really he was very proud of. So normally you wouldn't see two fingerprints in the work, but this one does. And they're really pretty noticeable. We don't know if they're his fingerprints, but they're somebody's fingerprints. And so I think if you look at any other Rungus paintings, you will not see those. I haven't noticed it on any.
Send them to the FBI.
Right. We could get it dusted. I don't know if we have record of his actual fingerprints. I like to say that he had finished painting it, and he was in such a rush to get it to the printers to make this poster that he mistakenly got his fingerprints. That's totally made up story. But it's a good one. And so this is really a special kind of corner. And again, one of the impetuses for this exhibit is telling these kind of fun stories about the collection, bringing those kind of things out. And this is just a great example, 2013, of continuing in the tradition of collecting representational wildlife art. But also, this was a really important piece when we first started doing the conservation gallery, so that we could talk about conservation issues, talk about artists going to see these creatures in their natural habitats, but then also kind of advocating for their continued survival, or talking about what we can do to make sure that we have polar bears around in 100 years. Collection growing. Then this piece I wanted to bring out so that we can talk about the Trustees Purchase Award from Western Visions, talk about Western Visions in general if you want. This is not the first Trustee Purchase Award winner. That's a small Chris Bacon painting. But this is, I think, the biggest and most impressive piece that we've been able to buy through that program. So it's a nice piece also to sort of start wrapping it up in here. Continuing on the theme of branching out and broadening the scope of what we've got, this is a video piece that we purchased at Blacktail Gala, at the first Blacktail Gala. Blacktail Gala is the junior version, if you will, of Collector Circle. And it is a fun evening for a younger crowd at a lower price point, where we've been able to create a pretty amazing collection of contemporary art. Other pieces from Blacktail that are out right now are most notably the penguins in Pathways. This is called Binocular. It's by a video artist named Leslie Thornton. She was commissioned to do a whole series of these pieces that was shown in Times Square. So all the video screens in Times Square were taken over at certain a certain evening by these projections that she did. And so this is, the same piece of film played at the same time, but this with a kaleidoscopic kind of filter, and this just kind of straight. So I like to, it's like, and the music is kind of spooky, so we don't really have it turned up very loud. I think she made the music also,
Yeah.
but it's taking the familiar and making it strange in order to get you to kind of look at it and think about it maybe in a new and a different way. So the music ties into that. And then just a funny kind of aside. Paintings, sculptures, etc. You put them away, they stay there, you bring them out, you put them on the wall, you put a light on them, and you're in great shape. That takes, maybe 15 minutes. This took me a day and a half to figure out how to get this little video file to play on repeat on this TV. So it's just one of those funny things. When you start going into digital, technical stuff, that inevitably there's something crazy that happens. So these two exhibits are sponsored by the same people, so you'll see this sign in both exhibits. This nice piece from 2016 is a work that was donated by the Proctor family. We talked about that earlier with the record mountain sheep over there. And again, there's many, many more pieces from their donation in the JKM gallery. A really nice collection of Proctor works. Proctor, Kemmys was really the first American artist to specialize in wildlife. Proctor was the second, or came really hard on the heels of Kemmys. And Proctor went on to have a more successful and more diverse career. Kemmy's career never really took off as well as Proctor's. So 2016. And then the nice way to end this exhibit is with 2017. And this is a beautiful piece by Charlie Russell that is an anonymous donation given to us this year to commemorate, gifted anonymously in honor of the trustees, staff, and volunteers who served the museum during its first 30 years. So it's a really nice, really beautiful way to commemorate, the museum history and all of the hard work of you and us and the board. So it's very sweet. And this is a really great example of Charlie Russell from a great period of his career, 1905. And, kind of a classic Charlie Russell setting up a scenario like the to Victor belong the spoils, and then letting you kind of decide what you think is going to happen in this.
The William R. Lee one.
Right, it is like the William R. Lee one. Yep. And it's fun. We got to look closely. This little guy, he did a really nice job on the calf's face, and then this person turning around, getting ready to knock one of these wolves out of the stratosphere. So that, I think, is a little story about every single thing in here.
It's really lovely.
We can go talk about Jackson Collects, or if you have any questions in here, I'm happy to answer that.
What's the dry point?
So it's an engraving, but one of the tools is called a dry point. So it's just it's a regular etching or engraving, but it's more about the type of tool you use, so we call those dry points. The dry point resulted in a little bit of a softer line being etched into the plate, whereas you know how that works? You carve into the plate, and you put ink on it, and then you yep. So the dry point was a name of a tool that he used, that he favored in those prints.
Can you talk about the terracotta process? I think of terracotta pottery, so.
It's the same process. It's not a common one, but I think that, they poured or packed the terracotta clay into the mold, fired it, glazed it. There you go. I've seen one or two of those
So
one or two of
glaze
those
it as
up.
well.
Yeah, there's definitely a glaze on there.
So is that light?
No, it's very heavy. So I think it was probably also not always successful in that if you try to fire that mass of clay, it's gonna break. It's not gonna work. So that's another thing I feel about Kemi's, like he was trying all these different things that didn't work out as well as he had hoped. Like the cougar and the kitties. That's lead covered in copper and then patinaed and went through the electroplate process, and that just didn't really take off as a way to do bronze sculpture or fine art sculpture.
So is a medium for sculpture, not too many sculptors would use to.
Not too many people gravitated to this, but then you can look at like the Picassos we have where he was decorating ceramic forms or pots or plates or whatever. So it's definitely its own niche, but for creating sculptural figures like this, it didn't take off unless you were super specialized in that, like Meissen pottery. There's a whole factory that produced all these amazing birds in wonderful clay and ceramics. You've all seen those little cute figures. I can't remember what the company is that made those, but so there's all kinds of people that were creating these kinds of sculptures, but it didn't translate to the same market as like the bronzes, and that's what I think Kemi's was trying to do.
Is this solid or is it somewhat?
It is hollow on the bottom there, but then that cat, it is really heavy, so I think that the cat is pretty much solid. So there might have been a flue or something up here, but it is a solid piece of clay. And so yeah, I just imagine firing like 20 of these, 15 of them breaking. But I don't know that that's true. All right, so that is 30 Wonders, 30 Years.